Billionaire catches Maid dancing with his deaf twins, what she taught them money couldn't buy. He thought he had seen everything money could buy: luxury cars, private jets, mansions with ceilings so high they echoed. But what he walked into that evening was something no fortune could prepare him for. In the quiet stillness of his home, behind the polished marble counters and glittering chandeliers, he found a scene so unexpected, so unexplainable, that it froze him in place. The billionaire had built his empire on control. Every detail of his life was accounted for, from the stocks in his portfolio to the staff in his home. Nothing slipped through the cracks. Nothing surprised him, until he stepped into the kitchen that night. There, in the dim golden light, the maid he had hired to quietly manage household chores was moving in ways he had never imagined. She wasn't just cleaning, she was dancing, her body flowing to a rhythm he couldn't hear, but somehow the room seemed alive with it. And she wasn't alone. His twin children, born into privilege, yet silenced by a world they could not fully hear, stood nearby, their small hands lifted, their faces lit with a joy he had not seen in years. They were deaf, locked in a quiet universe of their own, yet somehow they were following her every movement, responding to her rhythm, and echoing her joy. It should have been ordinary, a maid dancing with children. But for him, it was not. His children rarely smiled, rarely laughed, rarely connected with anyone, not even him. And now, here they were, alive in ways he thought impossible, bridging a world he believed had been closed to them. He watched, unable to speak, as she guided them with gestures more graceful than words, teaching them something he had never dared to believe they could learn. In that moment, he realized he wasn't just watching a dance. He was watching the start of something that could change everything he thought he knew about his children, about life, about himself. But what would he do? Step forward and stop her, or let the moment unfold? And more importantly, why did this maid, of all people, hold the key to a world his billions could never unlock? The billionaire's name was Charles Whitmore, a man whose face had once graced magazine covers as the symbol of self-made success. He was brilliant, calculated, and relentless, qualities that had built his empire, but also built invisible walls around him. For years, Charles believed that money solved problems. He believed resources could buy happiness, therapy could buy healing, and technology could replace what life had denied. Yet despite all his wealth, there was one truth that no dollar amount had managed to erase. His twins, Amelia and Adam, had been born profoundly deaf. Doctors had explained it clinically, as if numbers and medical jargon could soften the blow. They will never hear, they had said. There are options, but they will live in a world without sound. At first, Charles approached it like a business problem: specialists, state-of-the-art devices, tutors flown in from across the world. He lined up experts as if they were consultants in a corporate takeover. But nothing worked the way he expected. His children remained locked in a quiet realm of their own. Amelia, the older by 5 minutes, was shy and withdrawn. She often carried a book, not to read, but as a shield from the world she struggled to engage with. Adam was the opposite: restless, unpredictable, frustrated by a world that never seemed to meet him halfway. Together, they existed like shadows in their father's mansion, visible but untouchable, present but distant. Charles loved them in the only way he knew how: providing. He bought them the best schools for children with special needs, the most advanced equipment, private instructors. But when he looked into their eyes, he saw no spark, no laughter, no childhood. And for a man who conquered markets and competitors alike, it was the one failure that gnawed at him day and night. The staff in the mansion rotated frequently: nannies, tutors, maids, all carefully selected, all equally temporary. The children never warmed to anyone, and Charles never expected them to, until Rosa arrived. Rosa was unlike the others. She had no glittering degrees, no polished resume stamped with Ivy League approval. She was quiet, reserved, and came from a background far different from the wealth of the Whitmore estate. She worked hard, spoke little, and faded into the background as most staff were expected to do. But Charles noticed one thing almost immediately: the twins didn't ignore her. At first, it was subtle: Amelia lingering a little longer in the kitchen when Rosa was tidying up, Adam pausing in the hallway when she passed, his restless hands stilled for a moment. And then, without explanation, the children began to follow her. She never sought them out. She never tried to force interaction. Yet somehow, they were drawn to her. Charles had dismissed it as coincidence. Children were unpredictable, after all. But that night, when he entered the kitchen and saw them moving in sync with her, responding not with words but with smiles, he felt something he hadn't in years. Shock mixed with curiosity. Why her? Why this maid? With no specialized training, no expensive devices, no carefully curated methods. What did she know that the experts didn't? As he stood there, hidden in the doorway, the marble floor cool beneath his feet, Charles realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Rosa wasn't teaching them music. She was teaching them to feel it. Her dance wasn't about sound. It was about rhythm, vibration, connection. The twins weren't hearing her. They were experiencing her. Through every step, every movement, they were learning a language their father had never been able to give them. For years, Charles had tried to buy solutions. But maybe the answer was never in money. Maybe it was in something simpler, something human, something he had overlooked. The moment was fleeting, yet powerful. And though he didn't know it yet, what Rosa had unlocked in that kitchen would set off a chain of events that no fortune could predict and no empire could control. The following morning, Charles couldn't shake the image from his mind. The sight of Amelia and Adam, smiling, genuinely smiling, burned into him like an unanswered question. He had seen them entertained before, distracted by screens or toys, but never alive with such pure joy. It unsettled him. For a man who prided himself on control, this was something beyond calculation. At breakfast, he watched his children closely. Amelia sat with her usual book propped up in front of her. But this time her eyes were different, softer, brighter. Adam tapped his spoon against the table, but not in his usual restless pattern. It was rhythmic, deliberate, as though echoing something only he remembered. Neither child noticed Charles studying them, but he noticed. He noticed everything. He decided to test it. Later that day, he excused himself from a business call and lingered in the hallway near the kitchen. He kept his presence hidden, listening for signs of what had happened the night before. And there it was again, soft, almost inaudible sounds of humming, the shuffle of feet against tile. Rosa. He stepped closer, his heart quickening. Through the half-open door, he saw the same scene unfold. Rosa moving gracefully, her steps measured, her arms weaving shapes in the air. The twins watched with rapt attention. Amelia mirrored her hand movements, clumsy at first, but growing more confident. Adam's small feet stomped to match her rhythm, his face lit with determination. They weren't hearing the music, there was none. They were feeling it, reading it from her body, absorbing it like sunlight. Charles stood frozen. His empire, his billions, his relentless pursuit of solutions, none had achieved this. Yet here was a maid, paid a fraction of what he spent on private instructors, unlocking a world for his children. But with admiration came unease. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she kept this hidden, as though it were a secret? He found himself torn between gratitude and suspicion. The days that followed only deepened the mystery. Every evening, the children slipped away from their usual silence and into Rosa's orbit. They weren't just dancing, they were learning. She used claps, taps on the counter, vibrations against the floor to guide them. Charles watched from the shadows more times than he admitted to himself, each night more astonished than the last. And yet, questions gnawed at him. Who was Rosa, really? Why had she taken this approach when others had failed? Did she have some background she hadn't revealed? Or was it something more, something that couldn't be taught, only lived? The household staff began to notice changes as well. Amelia spoke more with her hands, her gestures sharper, clearer. Adam was calmer, his frustrations replaced with bursts of eager energy. The children, once distant and unreachable, now clung to Rosa like a beacon. They looked for her in every room, followed her with unspoken trust. For Charles, the shift was both beautiful and terrifying. He had built his life on being the provider, the solver, the man with all the answers. But Rosa had given his children something he could not. It was humbling. It was unsettling. And it made him wonder whether his billions had blinded him to the simplest truths. Then came the night that changed everything. Charles returned home later than usual, stepping quietly into the house. He heard laughter, a sound so foreign in his mansion that it made him pause. It wasn't the polite laughter of colleagues at a corporate dinner. It was raw, unrestrained, echoing through the marble halls. He followed it to the kitchen, where he found not just Rosa and the twins, but something more astonishing. The children weren't simply copying her, they were leading. Amelia moved first, her arms describing shapes in the air, her body swaying with unexpected grace. Adam followed with bold, stomping steps, his movements filled with confidence. And Rosa? She stood back, watching them, letting them guide the rhythm. For the first time, Charles saw his children not as shadows of themselves, but as stars in their own performance. His breath caught. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also a revelation and a confrontation. Because at that moment, Charles realized this wasn't just a dance. This was freedom, and the question that loomed over him was no longer about Rosa's secret. It was about himself. Would he allow this change to grow? Or would his need for control smother it before it bloomed? The night of the confrontation came without warning. Charles had returned early from an important business dinner, his mind still buzzing with numbers and contracts. Yet when he stepped into the house, the sound that greeted him wasn't silence, it was vibration. He felt it through the floor before he even saw it, a pulsing rhythm that seemed to seep into the walls themselves. Drawn by it, he followed the echo to the kitchen. What he saw stole the air from his chest. Amelia and Adam were in the center of the room, moving with abandon. Their little feet pounded against the tile, their hands cutting through the air in perfect, practiced rhythm. Their faces glowed with unrestrained joy, their eyes bright with a life Charles had never known existed within them. And Rosa was there too, not leading this time, but clapping along, encouraging them, letting them command the rhythm. It was breathtaking. It was terrifying. Charles's instinct screamed for order, for control. This was his home, his children, his life. And here they were, dancing like wild sparks in the dark, guided by a maid who had somehow succeeded where he had failed. The sight stirred something raw in him. Pride, yes, but also fear. Fear that he had been nothing but a spectator in his own children's lives. Fear that a stranger had given them more in weeks than he had in years. Enough. His voice cut through the air like a blade. The children froze. Amelia's hands faltered midair, Adam's stomping feet stilled. Rosa turned, her eyes wide, startled by the sharpness in his tone. Charles stepped into the kitchen, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. He looked at Rosa first, his expression hard, demanding answers she couldn't yet give. Then he looked at his children, their faces shifting from joy to confusion, confusion to fear. He had never wanted them to fear him, yet here it was, written across their small faces. And it pierced him deeper than any business loss ever could. Why? His voice trembled, though he tried to hide it. Why are you teaching them this? Who gave you permission? Rosa's lips parted, but no words came. She didn't lower her gaze, though. She stood firm, her silence louder than excuses. Charles turned back to Amelia and Adam, expecting tears or retreat. But what he saw shattered him. Amelia stepped forward, her hands moving in the air, sign language, hesitant but clear. She signed the word happy, then again, firmer, happy. Adam followed, stomping his feet once, twice, then slapping his chest with both hands. His face was fierce with determination as he signed the same word, happy. It hit Charles like a blow. In all the years of therapists, tutors, devices, and specialists, he had never seen his children express their happiness so directly, so powerfully. And now, here they were, demanding to be seen, demanding that he understand. He staggered back a step, his carefully built world crumbling. The empire he had built on money and control meant nothing in this moment. His children were telling him, with their hands and their hearts, that they had found something priceless, a way to feel alive. And Rosa? She hadn't stolen his role. She had given them a gift he never could. For the first time in years, Charles felt powerless. Not the powerless of losing a deal or missing an opportunity. This was deeper, more human. He realized he had been chasing solutions with his wallet, while the answer had always been connection, something Rosa had given freely, without expectation of reward. The silence in the kitchen was thick, broken only by the faint sound of Adam's stomps still vibrating through the floor. Charles's throat tightened, his pride warring with the truth unfolding before him. He could end this now. Dismiss Rosa, restore his control, retreat into the safety of wealth and order. Or he could step forward into the unknown, admit his failure, and embrace what scared him most, the vulnerability of being a father, not just a provider. And as Amelia's trembling hands signed the word once more, happy, Charles knew the decision would define more than just this night. It would define who he truly was, not as a billionaire, but as a father. The silence in the kitchen stretched long after Amelia's hands stopped moving. Charles stood frozen, his chest tight, his mind caught between pride and shame. His children had spoken without words, telling him they were happy, telling him that Rosa had given them something money had never bought. And for once, the billionaire didn't know what to say. Rosa remained still, her posture steady, though her eyes flickered with uncertainty. She hadn't expected to be caught, hadn't expected to be questioned. Yet she had also done nothing wrong, and her quiet defiance reflected that. Charles took a deep breath, his gaze shifting between Rosa and the twins. The empire he built was always about control, but here, in this moment, he realized control was the very thing keeping him from knowing his children. His wealth had built walls. Rosa had torn them down with nothing but rhythm and compassion. He exhaled, the weight of years of distance pressing down on him. Slowly, carefully, he stepped toward Amelia and Adam. They tensed at first, uncertain of his intent. But instead of scolding, instead of demanding obedience, Charles lowered himself onto the floor, eye level with them. The marble was cold against his knees. But for the first time in years, he felt grounded. He looked at Amelia, then Adam, and whispered words they couldn't hear but could feel through his presence. His lips formed the word, shaky but deliberate. Happy. The twins blinked, startled. Then Amelia smiled, a small, hesitant curve of her lips. Adam let out a burst of laughter, his hands clapping against his chest as if to say, yes, you understand. Tears burned at the corners of Charles's eyes. He hadn't cried in years, not since his wife passed, not since he'd buried himself in work to escape the grief. But here, in front of his children, in the quiet hum of the kitchen, he felt the cracks in his armor split wide open. Rosa watched quietly, her expression soft. She hadn't asked for recognition, but Charles gave it anyway, with a nod, small but filled with gratitude. She had bridged a gap he never knew how to cross. That night became a turning point. The days that followed were no longer marked by sterile silence. The mansion, once filled with echoes of emptiness, now pulsed with life. Rosa continued her dancing sessions with the twins. But now Charles was no longer a hidden observer. He joined them, awkward at first, stiff in his movements, but determined. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar deals, the simple act of clapping along to his children's rhythm felt more vulnerable than any boardroom battle. The twins blossomed. Amelia, once withdrawn, began to sign more freely, her hands weaving stories with growing confidence. Adam's restless energy found direction, his stomps and gestures transforming into expressions of joy rather than frustration. Together, they built a world where silence was not a limitation but a canvas for connection. And Charles? He changed too. The walls of control he had built around himself began to crumble. He no longer saw his children as problems to solve, but as people to know, to cherish, to learn from. He realized that fatherhood wasn't about providing resources alone. It was about presence, about being there in the quiet moments, about kneeling on the kitchen floor and clapping along with their rhythm. But change didn't come without challenge. Some of Charles's colleagues scoffed at his new priorities. He canceled meetings to attend sign language classes with his children. He turned down invitations to elite galas, choosing instead to spend evenings in the kitchen, learning the silent language that had always been within reach but never embraced. To the outside world, it seemed the billionaire had lost his edge. But to Charles, he had finally found what mattered. Rosa's role in the household shifted as well. No longer just a maid, she became a teacher, a guide, a friend. Her connection with the twins deepened, but so did her bond with Charles. She reminded him of something he had long forgotten, that human connection wasn't measured in wealth, but in moments, in patience, in care freely given. Months passed, and the transformation was undeniable. The twins grew more expressive, their joy infectious. Guests to the estate often marveled at the change, unable to reconcile the once silent children with the vibrant duo now leading their father in spontaneous dances. But the most powerful change wasn't visible to outsiders. It was in Charles himself. The man who once defined success by stock prices and quarterly gains now defined it by smiles, by laughter, by the simple sign Amelia and Adam used most often when looking at him. Happy. The kitchen, once a place of passing meals and hurried mornings, became the heart of the home. Every night, the marble floor bore the vibrations of Adam's stomps, the graceful arcs of Amelia's hands, and the awkward but heartfelt claps of their father. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in the end, it was shocking, not because of scandal or betrayal, but because it revealed a truth Charles had been blind to his whole life. That love, connection, and joy are not commodities to be purchased, but gifts to be shared. The billionaire had caught his maid dancing with his deaf twins, expecting perhaps to scold or to question. Instead, he discovered the very thing he had been searching for all along, a way to bridge the silence, a way to see his children not as fragile shadows, but as radiant souls. The moment that had begun as shock in a quiet kitchen became the story of his redemption, a story of how even the wealthiest man in the room could learn that the most valuable treasures are the ones money can never buy. And so the question remains, for all of us who chase success, who build walls of pride and control, when the chance comes to kneel down, to listen, to connect in ways we cannot measure, will we take it, or will we let it slip away, blind to the simple truth that happiness often dances right in front of us, waiting to be seen?